All right, welcome everyone. I'm recognizing a lot of your faces from the memorial service. If you want to record it, feel free. It's up if you want to take pictures. You're more than welcome to. Over there, I have a poster talking about design that shows contemporary images of what Bridget might have worn, and I also have my own recreation of what her red bodice might have looked like. If you want to take any pictures. All right. So. My name is Antonio Infante. I come from Haverhill. I've been sewing for about 5 years, 6 years almost. My best friend's mom actually taught me. The first thing I actually made was a dog pajamas. Fun fact. And actually starting back in last November is when I got involved with Cry Innocent. One of my friends knew Christina and put me in contact with her. So throughout the past winter and spring, that's how I've started my journey with Cry Innocent, and I can't wait to make the new costume for Bridget. Can't wait for you guys to see it. So, while working with Christina on coming up with a new ensemble for Bridget, there are many open questions such as, what did the bodice look like? How was it constructed? And how red was the bodice? Guesswork had to be made to create a decently historical garment that Bridget may have worn in her lifetime. Sadly, full historical accuracy is not available. Fabrics are no longer woven the same ways, and we have different atmosphere in the world now. Questions were asked and thoughts were put forward when designing, but first it's important to think about where it all came from. Using historical information from places like the Tudor tailor and Janet Arnold Patterns of Fashion gives a clearer picture of what the ensemble comes to mind. Color was prevalent in the Puritan society. Blues, yellows, greens, oranges, and tawnies were some of the most common colors according to historical records. Unlike what Hollywood perpetuates, black was not the common everyday color, unfortunately. Black was expensive and time-consuming to create and kept the color showing one station of what they could afford. Red, however, was more available than black. Red was seen in the Tudor and medieval eras and was seen as a healthy and warming color, perfect for kirtles and under petticoats. It was common amongst all classes, but red could also be somewhat expensive, depending on the quality. Coming from Madrid, it was an option, but it did require many ingredients, and the color also faded very quickly. Or one could get it from the cochineal beetle, but that was the most expensive because it was imported. Sorry. Regardless, it was a striking color, and obviously, it made Bridget stand out in the crowd. But once the silk, wool, or linen was dyed, it was made up into the garment by a tailor for the person. It is important to remember the expense wasn't in the making of the garment, it was in the quality of the fabric. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. It is unknown whether the real garment Bridget wore was a bowen bodice or a simple gown. If it was a bowen bodice, she would have worn it over her shift and her petticoats, with the bodice providing her support. If it was a gown, she would have had her shift, her stays, and her under petticoats, and then her gown to make her full ensemble. It is open to interpretation how Bridget may have looked, and if you've seen Cry Innocent in the past, you have noticed every Bridget has a different costume. So I can't wait to just add to that full multiverse of Bridget Bishop. Not only how the bodice appeared could be debated, also how it was made. And when she had it made is questioned. Described as paragon, it is a wool blend, commonly with silk and sometimes linen, and could have been watered for a moire effect. It was bordered and looped with a trim of many colors around the edge of the bodice, and presumably trimmed off a bit of lace, going off the testimony of Samuel Shattuck when Bridget appeared asking for bits of lace to be dyed. It is unknown when Bridget received the garment, but she likely got it after her marriage to Edward Bishop in the early 1680s. After the death of Thomas Oliver, as mentioned at the memorial service, she was left destitute and was forced to pay off her debts. Thus, her marriage to Edward Bishop elevated her status somewhat, hence her ability to purchase her new garment. The gown likely was not her everyday garment, perhaps for church or going to market, aka her Sunday best. But when she appeared in public, her gown would have been seen as showy and out of her station, making her stand out in the crowd and creating the perfect identifying trait for her in 1692. and testimony from Richard Coleman, we get the description of her red paragon bodice and the rest of the clothing she usually did wear. Another testimony was from William Stacy, describing her specter wearing a red coat, not a coat, her petticoat, and a black cap and hat. Her black cap and her black hood are just as important to the red bodice. They go hand in hand with each other. As mentioned, black was an expensive color. To dye the fabric, black required multiple dye baths of various colors. Blues and reds make up most of the process, but black was also hard to keep. The dye faded quickly, leaving a blue or red hue to the fabric. Even though caps and hoods can be made of offcuts of fabric, they could still show one's station and wealth. Having her red gown and black accessories, Bridget was stepping out of her station by showing wealth they believed she did not deserve. Various primary sources and records from examinations from other accused and testimony, hoods are mentioned very frequently. The first mention is from the examination of Tituba in March of 1692. When asked by Hawthorne to describe what the specters of other witches wore, she describes a black silk hood with a white silk hood underneath it with top knots, as well as a serge coat with a white cap, I think. Top knots was a common hairstyle worn in the 1690s. What the hood is made of is important in this society. Clothing was dictated by law, and one could be fined for wearing something above one's station. Puritans also viewed as wearing silks and other fine fabrics as a sign of making a pact with the devil. The hood and cap dyed black and the gown dyed red are signs of wealth and status, and the laborious dyeing process as well. As mentioned previously, after the death of her husband, Bridget was left destitute, but through her marriage to Edward, she was left in better financial status, and she was finally able to afford such lavish garments appropriate for a woman of her station. However, society viewed her new expensive and immodest garment as rejecting God's plan of her being poor and destitute. They viewed her as as sinful and going against God's plan. They viewed her as tempting others with sin and something that would come against her in 1692. Taking this information into account, there were a few important things we wanted to put into her gown. Mainly, the gown being red. Second, whether or not to make the gown a separate bodice and skirt or an all-in-one gown. And by having a separate bodice and skirts, they can have that mix and match aspect. Her eeks have been interpreted as being a hemband worn around to protect the hem. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, paragon is no longer woven, so the bodice will not be 100% historically accurate. And of course, finally, her black cap and hood are another important aspect that we had to include in this garment. Another important design choice is a shorter skirt to keep off the ground. This would make a working class woman's life easier. Or perhaps her sleeves were shorter to keep her arms free to work and to move. Some more important details like this are things that will never be known unless we went to a time machine to see the real garment. But by using the testimony of Bridget's appearance and historical evidence, a more clear picture of who she was comes to light. A gown decorated with trim, worn over stays and a shift, and an under petticoat, and to complete her ensemble, a black cap and red hood. This is what made Bridget, well, Bridget and her society, something so simple and normal to the everyday woman was what kept her apart from everyone else. One last thing to remember is this. Clothing in New England society was not only viewed as an extension of oneself, but an outward reflection of who they were inside. When they saw Bridget in her red bodice, they saw a woman who broke societal norm, a person who stepped out of line, spoke her mind, and defended herself seriously. The evil red apple in their Garden of Eden. Fingers would point at her, whispers in the town, and looks at passers-by as if she could have walked down this very street 331 years ago. But she did not care. She held her head high and not let judgment get to her. She was a person who did not crouch in fear behind someone else. Until the end, she defended herself bravely. To me, that's what Bridget's red symbolizes, bravery and power. She will always be a part of Salem's history, and who knows, Bridget is out there somewhere. After all, in Salem, anything is possible. As mentioned, there will be a performance of Crying Innocent, and it will be out backwards. So I think the rest will be outside out there. If you have a donation to the HAWAC, I forget how to pronounce it, but you will have donation, you will receive entry.